Third-order relational psychotherapy, social means to therapeutic ends. Published by the British publisher Ethics Press in 2025. In this new publication, Medina masterfully integrates systemic wisdom with post-structural philosophy and social research. Here we will focus mainly on the clinical methods of psychotherapy with third-order thinking. Guiding principle. This book is based on the idea that nothing in the psychological realm is natural. Nature is an invention of power. Some aspects of reality are deemed beyond discussion or criticism because they are considered natural. Scientific literature is saturated with research that has normalized abuse and exclusion, such as the inequality of women, slavery, racism, the abuse of women, gender and gender roles, and psychopathologies such as schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety. All of these have been refuted. Dr. Medina points out that this implies not only an epistemic or methodological dilemma riddled with simulation and unethical practices, but also practical effects of injustice for this population. These biological scientific explanations have been used to justify exclusion, denial, mistreatment, persecution, silencing, and killing. This publication is based on the idea that nothing about human beings is natural. As Gregory Bateson pointed out, nature and culture constitute each other in an ecological dimension. This means that the biological and the corporeal are organized through personal biography, social interaction, and interaction with nature. These units are always interconnected ecological dimensions, not independent variables. Dichotomies are fictitious constructs that organize reality into hierarchies and priorities, creating expectations and privileges and giving rise to excluded and invisible subjects. This context is the prelude to psychopathology. How is psychopathology related to the socio-political dimension? The body is an ecological unit containing relational wisdom which responds to abuse in the form of symptoms, even if the person resigns themselves to or justifies the abuse. Examples include living in an unsatisfactory marital relationship and justifying staying in it due to an irrefutable belief, or experiencing conditions of poverty and exclusion that jeopardize one's dignity and health. The body rebels because it is a wise ecological entity that shows its disagreement. Madness is real, but not natural. In other words, madness reveals itself as a form of resistance in the face of mistreatment, psychological discomfort, and emotional and physical suffering. This could be interpreted as a form of political positioning in response to injustice. So, what is the link between injustice and psychopathology? Injustice is not confined to the field of economics, but extends to all spheres of ecology. Here, we will review social injustice as a cause of personal distress. In particular, it concerns a system of non-recognition and, therefore, structural exclusion organized through public policies. The non-recognition of certain groups in society as legitimate rights holders renders them invisible and makes them disappear as citizens. This generates what are now known as minorities and leads to a fracture in social cohesion. This creates a specific type of normalized subjectivity. Structural exclusion leads to socio-psychological deactivation. They justify their misfortune by claiming it is something they had to endure, leading to self-reprisal, self-contempt, resignation, and self-punishment. These responses of defeat are all governed by public policies that construct subjectivities and feelings of personal failure, leading to what is termed psychopathology. So where does the concept of structure and systems of systems, or the third order, fit in? It should be noted that structure is not external to individuals, but exists in everyday life. According to Medina, the third order operates with the greatest power from this point. The most intimate circles, such as family and friends, have become active guardians of the established order, imposing structural expectations. They use micropolitical and emotional strategies of subjugation, such as ignoring, excluding, controlling, rejecting, mistreating, and repressing. Therefore, injustice, as a dimension of power, does not operate externally to families, but within intimate life. In the intimate sphere, relational bonds are tinged with high emotional content, impacting individual identity. The interplay between love and power, guided by structural symbolism, often leads to self-deception, resignation, and self-subjugation, the final bastions where structural power is most evident. If situations of injustice persist, the body will show resistance in the form of symptoms. The problem is exacerbated when psychological distress is treated as an individual disease, blaming the individual and their body, because the ethical, political, and social dimensions of psychological distress are denied. What is the focus of third-order diagnostic exploration? The first step in the clinical process is to investigate why this family and community have lost their supportive dialogue. Why do the most intolerable conditions of existence so often appear acceptable and even natural? In the case of couples, for example, this could manifest as living in a loveless marriage, normalizing abuse, sacrificing oneself for the supposed well-being of the children, not wanting to lose status, pretending that everything is fine, or placing all one's well-being in the hands of someone who does not love one in return. Third-order dynamics are invisible, yet they are present in everyday family life through myths. These are not just fables or lies, rather, we are referring to those that are an ideological construct loaded with normative meaning that escapes critical analysis. Myths are ideas that are imposed as obvious, natural, and inevitable. However, if examined closely, they reveal contradictions, ambiguities, and socio-emotional uses in their constitution. Myths unify subjectivities and alienate behaviors, desires, needs, thoughts, and life projects. They are real, but not natural. They are social constructs, not natural realities. In the clinical field, we explore what gives a family greater power or loyalty. In particular, we examine what belief or ideology has led them to break the dialogue of solidarity. For instance, in patriarchal mythology, a family member may be excluded for expressing their homosexuality. In classism and meritocratic individualism, a child may be pressured to achieve professional success without receiving adequate support. There are many examples of family patterns and narratives in which loyalty to a mythology takes precedence over self-respect and love for others. How can third-order consciousness be achieved? Third-order relational therapy aims to raise awareness of structural violence in everyday intimate, family, and community relationships. To this end, it shifts the focus from psychopathology to structural pathologies to reveal the beliefs underlying abusive behavior. Added to this are material conditions such as poverty and job insecurity, which also interfere with well-being. The symptom is removed from the body in order to contextualize it. Becoming aware of structural pathologies makes visible the network of complicities that impose structural symbolism. This involves exploring the people, with names and surnames, who participate in abuse and exclusion through a collective pact, without necessarily agreeing with it. It is also necessary to recognize the socio-emotional tactics they use to subjugate others. What are the clinical objectives and methods of third-order relational psychotherapy? The objective of the proposed psychotherapy is to restore dialogue between the family and their support network by promoting loving indignation, resistance, honest critical reflection, reparation, and supportive dialogue that leads to positive change. What role does indignation play in clinical intervention? The proposed clinical work focuses primarily on raising awareness of the systems operating in the intimate sphere, as well as the justifications for self-deception expressed therein. The aim is to redefine psychopathology as a form of social injustice that silences individuals and undermines their willpower. From this perspective, the relational pattern of abuse is redefined within an ecological context. This is positive, as intervention shifts from biology to the social sphere, from pills to willpower, from victimhood to shared responsibility, from control or adaptation to resistance, and from silence to dialogue. Once this mechanism is understood, it is possible to react with indignation. The feeling of social injustice arises from a seriously damaged sense of personal dignity, which is both moral and political in nature. Unlike the desire for revenge or retaliation, indignation implies an awareness that something in society is very wrong and needs to be changed. Indignation is an emotional and political act that can be used as a psychotherapeutic resource. Adopting this approach means treating the client as a dignified person, which is a fundamental premise for facilitating therapeutic dialogue. What does the author mean by indignant love? Confronting injustice is more successful through collective resistance than individual action. If psychopathology is the product of social injustice, it must be recognized as a collective problem, not an individual one, and placed in its socio-emotional and political context. For instance, the sexual abuse of a girl by an adult relative constitutes not only a violation and assault against the girl herself, but also a betrayal of her family and community. For this reason, the search for justice is a collective task, not an individual one. Furthermore, recognizing that the other person is also a victim is crucial. It enables us to form an emotional connection with them and recognize their dignity as individuals. This shared feeling creates an opportunity for dialogue once again. It involves moving away from the symptoms of sadness, fear, despair, anger, pain, fighting, demands, abuse and the desire for revenge, and moving towards solidarity, respect and love for others and oneself. In this way, we can work together to build resistance. Indignant love implies a communion between people in which mutual needs are recognized. It is an emotional political category that stimulates dialogue based on solidarity among family members, encouraging critical reflection and enabling us to face together the external and self-imposed challenges we experience. Why critical dialogue? According to Medina, for dialogue to be reflective and enable innovation and change, it must always be critical. In other words, adopting a critical stance towards oneself and others involves viewing ourselves as the subject of analysis and evaluation. It may seem paradoxical to engage in dialogue from a critical position, but this involves accepting diverse, self-critical, and differing points of view. For the family to take care of each other in the face of the harsh and seductive blows of the structure, dialogue must have both ingredients. Being critical of ourselves and our family members enables us to avoid taking anything for granted, constantly rethinking the beliefs and rules we impose on ourselves and moving towards consensus and open negotiation as a way of life. This creates the possibility for unity and mutual care to take priority when faced with diverse dilemmas and challenges. What is the purpose of honest and self-critical reflection? After visualizing the systems and critically recognizing what led to division, separation, and conflict, as well as collectively expressing outrage, psychotherapy must confront the individual and encourage them to engage in honest and critical self-reflection. At this stage, the dialogue focuses on the client reflecting on their role in experiencing abuse or violence. This dialogue is necessary in therapy in order to carry out in-depth clinical work. Deepening self-reflection through critical honesty is a painful process, but it can have liberating therapeutic results as it reveals shared responsibility and consequences. Critical honesty leads to rebellion against oneself. Rebelling against who we are enables us to recognize the structural influence of existence and the intermediaries of power that remind us daily how we should be. Self-critical honesty gives way to deep psychotherapy and self-respect. Solidarity dialogue as relational reparation. For dialogue to have a healing power, it must be supportive. From an ecological perspective, Bateson, 1999, calls this the sacred unity, a continuous desire to participate with others in a place and to respect its context, striving for a shared life full of pleasure. This experience is reflected in our encounters with our fellow human beings and with the planet that sustains us. Emotional bonding and dialogue are not two separate dimensions, but go hand in hand. For Bakhtin, the emotional aspects of dialogue are fundamental because well-being is constituted here. From this emotional awareness, dialogue takes on greater social force and integrates individual identity and the relational dimension. The ultimate goal of third-order relational psychotherapy is to re-establish supportive dialogue between family members, dialogue that cares for and supports others from an honest and critical position, with a systemic awareness. Once this has been achieved, it will be the clients themselves who generate new agreements and resources to move forward. Who is this publication intended for? It is intended for clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, family and couples counselors, psychology students, postgraduates specializing in clinical psychology, and health and community workers.